Chapter 309. Void Gourd. All kinds of information about the Void Gourd suddenly appeared in Su Qin's mind. At the same time, Su Qin's mind quickly merged into the system space and saw a small palm-sized gourd floating quietly in a corner. The gourd was dark yellow and its surface was full of mottled traces of time as if it had existed for thousands of years and exuded an ancient aura. I didn't expect it to be a space treasure. A smile appeared on Su Qin's face. He was very satisfied. This void gourd was a space treasure. It contained an independent space that was about 1/10 the size of the East Palace. This made Su Qin quite happy. One had to know that although the system space could also accommodate everything, it could only store treasures obtained from signing in. For example, the demonic dragon that Su Qin had killed earlier couldn't be taken away in the system space. In the end, he could only refine the demonic dragon's flesh and blood on the spot into 9 drops of dragon blood. Such a rushed refining not only couldn't make the most of the demonic dragon's corpse, but it was also a waste of time. If there were powerhouses of the same level around at that time, how could there be time for Su Qin to refine? Although the space treasure had a single function and basically had no offensive or defensive effects, it was extremely convenient for peak mythical level or even Earth immortals. At least when carrying things, they only needed a thought and didn't need to worry about the number of things. Speaking of space treasures, when I step into the Earth immortal stage, I will go to the peak of Kunlun Mountain and take back the War God Temple. Su Qin touched it and made a decision in his heart. During the trip to Kunlun Mountain, Su Qin had successfully refined the War God Temple. However, due to the limitations of his strength, he could only wait until he became an Earth immortal to have the ability to control the War God Temple and summon it back from the depths of the void. Strictly speaking, the War God Temple was also a space treasure. However, compared to the space contained in the Void Gourd, the War God Temple was simply much stronger. The Void Gourd could only accommodate 1/10 of the East Palace's space, while the War God Temple encompassed half of the Empire of Tang. Of course, compared to other magic treasures, space magic treasures were the most unique of all magic treasures. Even the weakest space magic treasure could only be refined by supreme experts. This was also the reason why space magic treasures were so rare. At the very least, when Su Qin destroyed the Wanjian school, he did not find any trace of space magic treasures. The Wanjian school had a legacy of over 4,000 to 5,000 years, and was a legacy left behind by the 10,000 Swords Daoist, a land immortal of swordsmanship. One could only imagine how precious a spatial mystic treasure was if even it did not have one. It's said that the strongest have mastered the mysteries of space and can only refine space magic treasures with the help of space crystals. Su Qin thought to himself. Ordinary space magic treasures usually only have a space the size of the Taiji Palace, but this Gourd of the Void is 1/10 the size of the Eastern Palace. It should be a high-grade space magic treasure, or even a supreme-grade space magic treasure. Su Qin nodded slightly. As for the War God Hall, Su Qin shook his head slightly. From a certain point of view, although the War God Hall was a spatial treasure, it was definitely more precious than most supreme treasures. Just the War God catalog recorded in the depths of the War God Hall was enough to surpass everything else. Even a supreme expert would not be able to comprehend it after spending hundreds or thousands of years. With this Gourd of the Void, it will save me a lot of trouble. Su Qin's eyes turned slightly and looked outside the palace, at the many sect masters who were waiting respectfully. The next moment, Su Qin's figure disappeared. At the same time, on the palace walls, the Emperor of Tang, the Forbidden Army, and the ministers looked at the treasures that the sect masters had offered as an apology and were shocked. If the Kuragenkyo's 10 legacy magic treasures were somewhat understandable, then the medicine god sect's 10 500-year-old spirit herbs were beyond the imagination of the Emperor of Tang and the others. Although the Emperor of Tang's palace had hundreds or even thousands of years old ginseng, no matter how old the ginseng was, it was far inferior to spirit herbs. Spirit herbs could only grow in an environment with abundant essence qi and spiritual vigor. As for the Empire of Tang, before the recovery of the essence qi tide, the Empire of Tang did not even have the qualifications to produce spirit herbs. In fact, not only the Empire of Tang, But even in the entire overseas martial arts world, there were very few places where spirit herbs could grow, let alone a 500-year-old spirit herb. As for the Thunder Source Stone that Raytheon offered and the 18 Shui Ling fruits that the Snow God Palace offered, it was completely beyond the knowledge of the Emperor of Tang and the others. The Emperor of Tang and the others had never even heard of Thunder Source Stone or Shui Ling fruits, let alone seen them. However, since Raytheon, the Snow God Palace, and the other major sects had cautiously offered to apologize, it was obviously very precious. At least it was not inferior to the legacy magic treasures and 500-year-old spirit herbs. Should I accept it or not? The Emperor of Tang lowered his head and looked at the many sect masters standing respectfully outside the palace. He was slightly hesitant. Suddenly, at this moment, Su Qin in a black robe appeared silently in front of him and looked down at the sect masters. Third brother. The Emperor of Tang heaved a sigh of relief. If Su Qin did not appear, he really did not know how to deal with these sect masters. Greetings, Heavenly Lord. The Witchcraft Sect Master and the other sect masters immediately greeted Su Qin respectfully when they saw him. Not enough. Su Qin glanced casually and said calmly. If the major sects wanted to use these treasures to apologize to him, it was naturally far from enough. The Snow God Palace's palace master saw Su Qin speak and was overjoyed. He quickly said, Heavenly Lord, if you have any orders, we will definitely do it. He was not worried that Su Qin would raise other conditions, but that he would not say anything at all. If Su Qin did not say anything and did not make a clear statement, these major sects would feel like a sharp sword was hanging over their necks. They were worried that Su Qin would settle the score with them at any time. Add 20 Shui Spirit Fruits. Add 2 pounds of Thunder Origin Stones. Add 10 Legacy Magic Treasures. Su Qin glanced at the sect masters and said slowly. With his strength, he could naturally crush these sect masters who were not even peak legendary stage cultivators into powder with just a thought. But there was no need for that. Although the major sects had besieged Su Qin many times, in reality, Su Qin was not affected at all. Instead, the elders of the major sects had fallen one after another. In the end, even half-step Earth immortals had been killed. When the sect masters heard Su Qin's words, their faces instantly turned pale, especially the Kuragenkyo sect master. Even if the Kuragenkyo had accumulated for thousands of years, they only had slightly more than 10 legacy magic treasures. Now that Su Qin had asked for 20 legacy magic treasures, it was completely beyond what the Kuragenkyo could bear. However, no matter how bitter the Kuragenkyo sect master was, he did not dare to refute. The Kuragenkyo did not have any extra legacy magic treasures, but the other major sects had them. At most, they could use the other treasures of the Kuragenkyo to exchange for them. However, after this, the Kuragenkyo's vitality was definitely greatly damaged. Not only did the first ancestor, who was comparable to a half-step Earth immortal, fall, but even the martial Dao resources that they had accumulated for thousands of years had basically been given to Su Qin. Of course, to the Kuragenkyo, as long as Su Qin did not continue to pursue the matter, everything would be worth it. One had to know that the Kuragenkyo did not have supreme treasures like witchcraft and Raytheon to suppress them. If Su Qin was really prepared to make a move, the Kuragenkyo's outcome would probably be no different from Wanjian school. The sect masters of the other major sects basically had the same thoughts as the Kuragenkyo sect master. To many of the major sects, as long as the sect still existed, there would be a day when they would prosper again. What's wrong? Do you have any objections? Su Qin swept his gaze across the major sects and said indifferently, We don't dare. Reporting to Celestial, we have no objections. That's right, I'll return to the sect now and bring back the item that Celestial wants. Many of the sect masters trembled when they heard this and immediately bowed. In that case, all of you can scram back. With a thought, Su Qin instantly put away the treasures that the sect masters had just offered into the void gourd. This is the power of space. Celestial has mastered a certain space treasure? The witchcraft sect master felt the earth which would, in front of him, disappear. His pupils constricted, and he became even more respectful. Space treasures were extremely precious, and even ordinary major sects couldn't get their hands on them. However, the witchcraft sect was a major sect that had been passed down since the revival of the previous vital chi tide. They had a low-grade space treasure in their sect. The space inside was about the size of a house. Even so, this space treasure was hidden in the depths of the witchcraft sect, in the same place as the witchcraft sect master's supreme treasure. The witchcraft sect master didn't expect that Su Qin had mastered a space treasure. Space treasures could only be refined by supreme experts. If Su Qin had mastered a space treasure, could it be that he had obtained the inheritance of a supreme expert? Just as the witchcraft sect master was thinking about this, the other sect masters of the major sects all bowed and said, yes. So, the sect masters quickly left Chang and city and returned to their respective sections. And as the sect masters left completely, the other overseas martial artists in Chang and city were completely in an uproar. Su Qin ordered the sect masters, but the sect masters didn't even have the courage to refute and could only respond. This kind of behavior of suppressing the entire overseas sect master with his own strength was enough to be shocking in any other era. Just as countless martial artists were discussing, Su Qin had already returned to the stargazing tower. Su Qin naturally didn't refuse the treasures offered by the sect masters. Even if Su Qin didn't use the inheritance treasure, he could give it to others. But treasures like the Thunder Origin Stone and the Earth which wood were obviously thunder and wood treasures. Even if Su Qin didn't need them now, he might need them in the future when the Great Sun painting was completed and he cultivated the other 12 Divine Beasts paintings. According to Su Qin's guess, among the 12 mythological beast diagrams, the first Great Sun diagram was the strongest mythological beast of the fire attribute, the three-legged golden crow. Then, the following 11 mythological beast diagrams should symbolize the strongest mythological beasts of other attributes, such as the strongest mythological beast of the thunder attribute, the strongest mythological beast of the wood attribute, and so on. Now that he had gathered these treasures, it was equivalent to paving the way for cultivating the other divine beasts' paintings in the future. At least he wouldn't need to sign in temporarily to gather fire treasures to cultivate the Great Sun painting. I wonder what kind of divine beasts paintings are after the Great Sun painting? Su Qin sat on the stargazing tower with anticipation on his face. Just the first Great Sun painting alone was enough to surprise Su Qin. It allowed him to be on par with Earth Immortals even before he became an Earth Immortal. What about the other Divine Beasts paintings? One had to know that the power of the Divine Beasts paintings could be stacked. If Su Qin cultivated 2 Divine Beasts paintings, he would be able to use all the power of the 2 Divine Beasts at will. And once Su Qin cultivated the 12 Divine Beasts paintings, he would be able to enhance the power of the 12 Divine Beasts with a thought. How earth-shattering would that be? P.S. There are only a few hours left at the end of the month. If you don't vote now, it will really expire. Please, I beg for the monthly votes. In addition, readers of Qidian can go to the comments section to participate in the activity. There are fan titles and Qidian coins. As long as you subscribe to all the readers and reply, you can participate. There are many spots. Chapter 310. On the Stargazing Tower. Su Qin's thoughts fluctuated before he finally calmed down. No matter what kind of destructive power the 12 Divine Beast diagrams would possess in the end, Su Qin had not even completed the first diagram of the Great Sun. He had only reached the minor accomplishment level, and was still far from the great accomplishment level. However, now that these sect masters have personally come to apologize, it seems that there really isn't an Earth Immortal here. Su Qin had a thoughtful look on his face. As long as there were Earth Immortals in these great sects, they would never take the initiative to apologize like this. Moreover, they would agree to all of Su Qin's requests without daring to refute. What the pity! A trace of disappointment flashed in Su Qin's eyes. Originally, he wanted to force out an Earth Immortal to see the true power of the Golden Crow Divine Body. Previously, when the 7 half-step Earth Immortals joined forces, Su Qin only had to spend some effort. He didn't even use the I-type divine ability, so he couldn't see the upper limit of the Golden Crow Divine Body. However, this time, other than those sect masters, there are some other people here. Su Qin raised his head slightly and looked outside the palace at a famous inn in Chang'an City. This inn was called the Lucky Inn. At this moment, under Su Qin's gaze, hundreds of qi dynamics appeared. Some were strong and some were weak, but one of them was extremely special, as if it was covered by some kind of secret technique. If it were not for the Eye of Truth, Su Qin might have missed it. Even Su Qin, who had the Eye of Truth, almost did not notice it. It could be seen how profound the qi dynamics concealment technique was. It had even begun to involve qi dynamics. After all, qi dynamics were formed by the qi field of living beings. As long as it was a living being, it was inevitable that qi dynamics would appear. Even Earth immortals were no exception. Someone is secretly observing me? A trace of inexplicable meaning flashed across Su Qin's face. Although this qi dynamic did not make Su Qin feel threatened, in Su Qin's eyes, it was indeed quite interesting. After all, ever since he obtained the Eye of Truth, it was the first time he saw a method that could affect qi dynamics. Not an Earth immortal. Su Qin looked at it carefully again and shook his head slightly. When the primordial spirit of an Earth immortal merged with the primordial qi ocean, no matter how hard he tried to conceal it, he would still reveal the aura of merging with the primordial qi ocean and everything in the world. This was something that could never be hidden from Su Qin. Interesting. Su Qin took a step forward and disappeared. When Su Qin appeared again, he was already standing outside the Lucky Inn. Outside Chang'an City, Sect Master Raytheon met with his own patriarchs. Raytheon's hierarch quickly recounted everything he had experienced in Chang'an City. As the patriarchs of Raytheon listened, their expressions changed. Especially when they heard that Su Qin asked Raytheon to add another 2 pounds of Thunder Origin Stones, they were even more pained. Even if Raytheon had been accumulating Thunder Origin Stones for thousands of years, the Thunder Origin Stones he had were only a few pounds. Giving a pound of Thunder Origin Stones to Su Qin was already a huge loss. For Raytheon's disciples, Thunder Origin Stones could not only promote cultivation, but also play a great role in breaking through bottlenecks. Even when a peak myth broke through to an Earth immortal, gathering a certain amount of Thunder Origin Stones was equivalent to the effect of the Thunder Origin Stones. It could help the primordial spirit of a peak myth to feel the primordial qi ocean in the depths of the void more easily. It could be said that Thunder Origin Stones were definitely Raytheon's most precious treasures apart from the most precious treasures. Even the Thunder Calamity could not compare to it. After all, if they lost the Thunder Calamity it would have an impact on Raytheon, but it would not be great. However, if they lost the Thunder Origin Stones, the possibility of Raytheon becoming an Earth immortal would be infinitely reduced. The Tangwatian people have gone too far. Do they really think that Raytheon, can be bullied at will? A patriarch's face was filled with anger. Raytheon had been roaming the seas for thousands of years. When had he ever been suppressed like this? 1/2 pound of Thunder Origin Stones was not enough, and they wanted another 2 pounds? Did they really think that Thunder Origin Stones were stones by the roadside? The other patriarchs also looked indignant. In the end, everyone looked at the oldest ancestor in unison. This patriarch was the person with the highest status in Raytheon after the fall of the Thunder Ancestor. Do as the heavenly being said. The old patriarch was silent for a while and said slowly, "But patriarch, the remaining Thunder Origin Stones are prepared for Lei Xuanzi. If we give them to the Tangwatian people, if Lei Xuanzi returns in the future." A patriarch said hesitantly. Lei Xuanzi, Raytheon's sect master, listened respectfully. Although he was the sect master, he was an insignificant junior in front of the patriarchs. However, when he heard the words Lei Xuanzi, his heart was still stirred. Lei Xuanzi was the most talented person in Raytheon in the past 10,000 years. He was even known as the person who had the highest chance of becoming a land immortal. Unfortunately, Lei Xuanzi had disappeared 300 years ago. If it were not for the fact that the vital fire that belonged to Lei Xuanzi in the depths of Raytheon had not been extinguished, everyone would have thought that Lei Xuanzi had fallen. However, even if Lei Xuanzi was not dead, He had not appeared for 300 years. In the eyes of most people in Raytheon, he was most likely trapped in some dangerous place that he could not get out of. Or he was simply suppressed and sealed. It was no different from dying. It doesn't matter if Lei Xuanzi can come back in the future or not. But now that the Tanguitian people are dominating the world, if I, Raytheon, dare to go against the will of the heavens, even with the suppression of the supreme treasure, I will not be able to escape the fate of extinction. The old patriarchs said word by word. The patriarchs looked at each other and said silently, if Su Qin only showed the strength of an earth immortal, then although the Thunder God sect would be afraid, they would not be in a state of panic. The inheritance overseas has been passed down for thousands of years, and more than 10 earth immortals have been born. But now, these earth immortals have all died of old age, while the Thunder God sect still stands in the world. However, what really made Raytheon afraid was that now was the era of the recovery of the vitality tide. With Su Qin's strength, he might be able to take that step and touch the level of an immortal with the help of the vitality tide. An immortal, even in the heyday of the recovery of the previous vitality tide, an immortal was also a big shot who looked down on the world. When the cave world invaded the human world, if it weren't for the immortal blocking the hundreds of millions of devil race troops and suppressing countless devil race experts in the cave world, the human world would have been reduced to a paradise for the cave world. Of course. How difficult was it to become an immortal? Even in the heyday of the recovery of the vitality tide, there were only a few immortals, and all of them were the children of the world's luck and power. No matter how strong Su Qin was, the hope of becoming an immortal was still extremely slim. But Raytheon didn't dare to gamble. Not only Raytheon, when the patriarchs of the other great sects learned of Su Qin's request, they agreed without any hesitation. Even the great sects like the Snow God Palace and the Demon God Valley took the initiative to offer some other treasures in order to please Su Qin. At the same time, in Chang'an City, the Lucky Inn was bustling with activity. The children of officials, merchants, and martial artists came and went in and out of the inn. It was said that the Lucky Inn was the property of a big shot in the palace, which was why it could stand in Chang'an City for so long without falling. At this moment, there was only one topic that everyone on the 3 floors of the Lucky Inn was talking about. That was Su Qin. Su Qin just stood on the city wall and announced the fate of the sect masters of the upper sects as if he was a deity. Even the overseas legendary martial artists were in awe of him, let alone the others. Just as everyone was discussing fervently, 2 Daoist priests were sitting in a corner of the Lucky Inn. The 2 Daoist priests, one young and the other old age, were sitting there drinking wine and eating. It's been a long time since I've eaten mortal food. The old age Daoist priest took a sip of the Lucky Inn special wine, and a look of great enjoyment appeared on his face. The young Daoist priest beside him couldn't help but ask, "Master, the Tanguitan just showed up. Did you see anything?" "See what? How could the Lao Dao dare to spy on a deity?" The old age Taoist priest rolled his eyes and said, But Master, didn't you say that you wanted to see the Tanguitian's background this time?" The young Taoist priest blinked and didn't react for a long time. "Master, you didn't see anything at all." The young Taoist priest stared at the old age Taoist priest suspiciously. "What nonsense are you talking about?" The old age Taoist priest suddenly felt embarrassed and glared at the young Taoist priest. The Lao Dao's divine divination art is known as the art of divination. It's called the art of divination. Apart from breaking through everything, it's a supreme powerhouse who's untainted by karma. Even the land deities can't escape the art of divination. It's just that, when the old age Taoist priest reached this point, his tone paused slightly. The Tanguitian is indeed a little strange. If the Lao Dao is overseas and is separated by tens of thousands of miles, it's understandable that we can't divine his background. After all, the distance is too far, and it'll affect the art of divination. But just now, the Lao Dao saw the Tanguitian, but we still can't divine any useful information. This is really strange. The old age Taoist touched his chin and shook his head in the end. But although the Lao Dao can't divine anything, we can see that the Tanguitian's strength is very strong. It's no wonder that the 7 half-step land deities have all fallen. Even their primordial spirits couldn't escape, huh? When the young Taoist priest heard this, he immediately panicked. Master, the Tangguitian is so strong. Will he realize that we're secretly divining about him? Impossible? When the old Taoist heard this, a proud look appeared on his face. Although this old Taoist can't calculate the information of the Tang Empire's celestial being, the breath-concealing technique passed down by the Tianji sect shocked the previous era of the vitality tide. Even if an earth immortal is in front of me, he won't be able to detect it. As the old-age Taoist priest spoke, his gaze casually looked at the other places in the Lucky Inn. However, this glance made the old-age Taoist's voice come to an abrupt halt. His face instantly turned pale as if he had seen something unbelievable. Master, what's wrong with you? The young Taoist priest next to him felt strange. He followed the old-age Taoist priest's gaze and was similarly frightened. At the entrance of the Lucky Inn, a slender and tall figure slowly walked in. With every step the figure took, an inexplicable aura shrouded the surroundings, causing everyone in the inn to fall into silence. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps were neither fast nor slow, as if they were stepping on the old-age Taoist priest's heart. Under the old-age Taoist priest and the young Taoist priest's incredulous gaze, the figure that slowly walked into the inn stopped in front of them. Then, the figure casually sat opposite them and looked at the two of them calmly. Are you the one spying on me? P.S. Begging for votes at the beginning of the month. Chapter 311. Tangguitian? The old-age Taoist priest's face stiffened and was full of bitterness. He never thought that even the famous breath-holding skill of the Tianji sect in the last essential Qi-tide era could not hide from Su Qin. This was the breath-holding skill that even earth immortals could not lock onto. As a result, when he was in front of Su Qin, not only did he fail to avoid Su Qin's perception, but he also came to find him. In a flash, the old-age Taoist priest thought a lot, and finally got up, bowed respectfully to Su Qin, and said, Tianji Zi of the Tianji sect greets the celestial being. He's from the Tangguitian? The young Taoist priest next to him felt his scalp tingle. Although he had already seen Su Qin from afar on the walls of the imperial palace, that was just a sneak peek. But now, Su Qin had directly appeared in front of them. The difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth. For example, even if Su Qin did not release any aura, just standing there, the young Taoist priest could not breathe, and his genuine essence and divine thoughts were almost stagnant, as if he was not facing a human, but a prehistoric divine beast. Tianji sect? Su Qin sat casually on a sandalwood chair in the Lucky Inn and narrowed his eyes slightly. In the overseas martial arts world, the Tianji sect was very special. It did not belong to any of the upper sects, and there were not many disciples in the sect, but it pursued the divination of Tianji and wanted to calculate all the lives of the world with its own strength. It was precisely because of this that the disciples of the Tianji sect were basically obsessed with the divination method, and did not get involved in the mortal world or compete for foreign things. Decades ago, the overseas martial arts world spread the news of the land of great battle, and Yuan Qing came to Chang, in city because of this. It was because Tianji Zi of the Tianji sect had divined the land of great battle. It's interesting. Su Qin smiled and gently tapped on the table with his right hand. Suddenly, the people in the inn, who were almost condensed, recovered in an instant, as if they did not notice at all, and were still talking there. This is? When Tianji saw this, his body trembled. If it were other peak mythics, they might not have noticed anything, but Tianji could vaguely sense that Su Qin had used the power of his primordial spirit to forcibly freeze the minds of everyone in the inn. This was the reason why time seemed to have stopped. It wasn't that time had truly stopped. Instead, everyone's minds had been frozen. In fact, everyone's blood was still beating. Even so, the power of Su Qin's soul was unimaginably powerful to be able to silently freeze the minds of at least hundreds of people. This was not killing hundreds of people with the power of the Yuan spirit. Instead, it was freezing the minds of hundreds of people. The difficulty of the latter was countless times greater than the former. Speak. Why did the Heaven's Secrets sect come here? Su Qin said unhurriedly. If Tianjizi had come to Chang and City openly, Su Qin would not have bothered to pay attention to him. However, Tianjizi had concealed his aura and was sneakily spying on Su Qin. This naturally aroused Su Qin's interest. I just want to see if the celestial came from that place. Tianjizi hesitated for a moment and immediately said, if we offend the celestial, my Tianjizi sect is willing to offer up treasures. We hope the celestial can forgive us. Tianjizi's tone was extremely sincere. In fact, Tianjizi had no choice. Su Qin could even kill 7 half-step Earth Immortals, let alone the Heaven's Secret sect. If Tianjizi dared to provoke Su Qin, the entire Heaven's Secret sect would probably usher in the end, just like the Wanjian school. That place? What place? Su Qin's expression changed slightly. When Tianjizi heard this, he asked cautiously, do you know about the Immortal sect? Immortal sect? Su Qin's eyes flickered slightly. This was the second time Su Qin had heard about the Immortal sect. The first time was when the Wanjian school was destroyed, and the old man Fei Yu took the initiative to tell Su Qin where the Immortal sect had once appeared. According to the old man Fei Yu, the Immortal sect contained the secret to breaking through to the Earth Immortal level. For thousands of years, every Earth Immortal would search the world in their later years to find the Immortal sect and try to unravel the secret of the Immortal sect. According to Su Qin's guess, the Immortal sect should be related to the previous era of vitality. As for the specific relationship and what kind of existence the Immortal sect was, it was not clear. After all, even the old man Fei Yu knew little about the Immortal sect. So you do know about the Immortal sect? Could it be that you really came from the Immortal sect? Tianjizi's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw Su Qin's reaction, and there was a trace of excitement in his tone. Why do you think so? Su Qin's eyes were calm, and there was no change in his expression as he looked at Tianjizi and said faintly. The birth of the celestial beings suppressed the overseas martial arts world, and before that, there was no trace of them. You must know that the cultivation of a martial artist is after all a step-by-step process, but the celestial beings have infinitely shortened this process. Other than having something to do with the legendary Immortal sect, I really can't think of any other reason, Tianjizi said honestly. Of course, Tianjizi did not mention the most important point. Since Su Qin was born, he had killed almost all the major sections. In a way, Su Qin was definitely not from a major sect. If a martial artist who was not from a major sect wanted to become an Earth Immortal, he would have to consume a sea of resources and compete with many overseas major sects for martial arts cultivation resources. In the past hundreds of years, the Tianji sect had never heard of Su Qin. Under all kinds of speculations, only Su Qin came from the legendary Immortal sect, which could explain all this. I'm not from the Immortal sect. Su Qin shook his head. With his current strength that was comparable to an Earth Immortal, there was no need to use the name of the Immortal sect. The celestial beings are not from the Immortal sect? When Tianjizi heard this, a look of disappointment appeared on his face. Tianjizi did not doubt Su Qin's words. With Su Qin's strength, there was no need to lie to him. Tell me about the Immortal sect. Su Qin looked up at Tianjizi and said, yes. Tianjizi thought for a while, as if organizing his words, and said in a deep voice, the Immortal sect is a backup plan left behind by several supreme powerhouses in the last Vitality Tide era to fight against the silence of vitality and the withering of all things. A backup plan of several supreme powerhouses? Su Qin had a thoughtful look on his face. This was in line with Su Qin's guess. Originally, Su Qin suspected that the so-called Immortal sect was related to the supreme powerhouses like the War God Temple. Above the Earth Immortal is the Supreme Powerhouse, but the Supreme Powerhouse is not the name of this realm. It is just a description of a certain realm. For example, the Buddhist Arhat is called the Venerable, and the Earth Immortal is called the Celestial. At this point, Tianjizi's face turned solemn and he said solemnly, the realm after the Earth Immortal is called the Void-Breaking Realm. Void-Breaking Realm? Su Qin's expression did not change, but waves slowly rose in his heart. The so-called void-breaking realm was to shatter space. Powerhouses of this level could shatter the void with just a raise of their hand, just like the gods of creation. The supreme powerhouses of the void-breaking realm had already begun to comprehend the power of space. It was by relying on the power of space that they could shatter the void. This was also the reason why only the supreme powerhouses could refine spatial magic treasures. Without the supreme powerhouses' comprehension of the power of space, how could they refine a spatial magic treasure that could accommodate a small part of the void? The heaven and earth essence Qi is like a tide, rising and falling at times. The supreme powerhouses comprehended the power of space and naturally realized this early on. Therefore, in the previous essence Qi tide era, the few remaining supreme powerhouses joined forces to break through the void and opened up a small world outside the mortal world. When the essence Qi tide began to decline and the Dharma was about to wither, they sent their descendants in. The small world opened up by the supreme powerhouses was independent of the mortal world. Therefore, it was not affected by the essence Qi tide in the mortal world and could avoid the Dharma ending age when essence Qi declined. As Tianjizi spoke, his tone was full of awe. Compared to the supreme power of the supreme powerhouses to open up small worlds, even the earth immortals were as insignificant as dust. In a way, the supreme powerhouses of the void-breaking realm were already considered true immortals. I see. Su Qin nodded slightly, and some of the doubts in his mind were finally solved. For a long time, Su Qin felt a little strange. Why was there almost no information about the supreme powerhouses in the world? The empire of Tang was fine. After all, before the recovery of vitality, it was just a remote continent. However, overseas had thousands of years of heritage, especially witchcraft and Raytheon, which had been passed down since the last essence Qi tide era, but there were still very few rumors related to the supreme powerhouses. Now it seemed that it was not that the major sects deliberately concealed information about the supreme powerhouses, but that they had little to do with the supreme powerhouses and could not come into contact with the real supreme powerhouses. As early as thousands of years ago, the supreme powerhouses had brought their descendants and related people into the small world opened up to avoid the Dharma ending age when the vitality declined. The small world called Immortal Gate was painstakingly opened up by the supreme powerhouses. Even if it could not maintain the concentration of vitality and spiritual vigor during the heyday of the vitality tide, it was not far from enough to sustain the breakthrough of the earth immortals and even the supreme powerhouses. This was also the reason why the past generations of earth immortals searched the world to find the immortal gate in their later years. It was because only in the immortal gate would there be sufficient vitality and spiritual vigor for the earth immortals to break through. Moreover, because the supreme powerhouses had entered the immortal gate to avoid the decline of vitality, of course, they would not leave any important inheritance outside. Under the stillness of vitality, the environment of heaven and earth had become unfavorable for cultivation. Even if there was a heavenly divine art, it was meaningless. Immortal gate? Su Qin repeated these two words in a low voice. Originally, Su Qin thought that the Immortal Gate would be the name of a sect or a place, but he did not expect that the Immortal Gate was a small world opened up by the joint efforts of the supreme powerhouses to break through the void. It was simply a big deal, however. Tianjizi hesitated for a moment and continued. Although the Immortal Gate is a small world opened up by the supreme powerhouses, it is only a small world. There is a big difference between it and the human world. The vitality and spiritual vigor are not endless. According to the speculation of the Tianjizi sect's founder, when the vitality tide recovers again, the Immortal Gate will reopen. At that time, the creatures in the Immortal Gate will once again rule the world. Chapter 312. Oh! Su Qin's gaze sharpened. The Immortal Gate was a small world created by a few supreme experts during the previous vital Qi tide era. It was similar to an otherworldly paradise. In order to avoid being affected by the stillness of vitality in the mortal world, the Immortal Gate should be completely isolated from the outside world. However, Su Qin thought about it and felt that it was reasonable. The supreme powerhouses could shatter the void with a raise of their hand, and they were so powerful that they could even open up worlds. But in fact, how could the worlds opened up by the supreme powerhouses compare to the vast mortal world? If the mortal world was in a period of stillness, such a small world would naturally be a holy land for cultivation, enough for the immortals and even the supreme powerhouses to cultivate. But when the vitality began to recover and transition to the heyday, the small world would naturally be far inferior to the mortal world. Otherwise, in the last vitality tide era, the supreme powerhouses should have gone to the small world early instead of waiting until the vitality began to die down. How many supreme powerhouses entered the immortal gate back then? Su Qin pondered for a while and asked. In the heyday of the last vitality tide recovery, there were 7 supreme powerhouses who dominated the world. 2 of them were watched by a demon god in the depths of the cave world during the final battle with the cave world and escaped with serious injuries. The remaining 5 supreme powerhouses entered the immortal gate with their respective sects. At this point, Tianjizi paused for a while and continued. However, in addition to the 5 supreme powerhouses and their sects, other forces also entered the immortal gate. Are you clear about the current situation in the immortal gate? Su Qin asked casually. The immortal gate is completely separated from the mortal world. Even the people inside the immortal gate would find it extremely difficult to come out, let alone the people outside. Although my Tianji sect can calculate the heavenly secrets, the immortal gate is suppressed by the aura of the supreme powerhouses, and karma is not involved. At this point, Tianjizi didn't go on. Obviously, the means of the supreme powerhouses were too powerful. They could even shatter the void, let alone block the calculation of the Tianji sect. But after so many years, no matter how the immortal gate has changed, the sects left behind by the 5 supreme powerhouses should still exist, Tianjizi said with certainty. The celestial sects were established by powerful cultivators. 10,000 years had passed, and even if the most powerful cultivator died of old age, the methods he left behind were enough to ensure that the sect he left behind was in charge of the celestial sects. Over the past 10,000 years, there have been more than 10 land immortals from overseas, but none of them have entered the immortal sect? Su Qin seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked. Celestial, you must be joking. Tianjizi shook his head and said, the celestial sect and even the small worlds created by the experts piercing through the void are not in the mortal world. If you want to forcefully enter the celestial sect from the mortal world, you have to use your physical body to traverse a void passage. However, the void passage is filled with the power of space. Apart from those who have mastered the power of space, even 100 Earth immortals would die if they went there. A trace of helplessness appeared on Tianjizi's face. Of course, coming out of the immortal sect is definitely not that dangerous, but it's not easy either. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a single person from the immortal sect who hasn't stepped into the human world for 10,000 years. I see. Su Qin said thoughtfully. If it were other land immortals, even a peak land immortal like Lord Donghai, they would never dare to touch the void passage. But Su Qin was different. Su Qin had the picture of the great sun. Once he cultivated the picture of the great sun to great mastery, he would be able to transform into the strongest divine beast of the fire element, the 3-legged golden crow. And with the physique of the 3-legged golden crow, even if it was just a cub, how could it be afraid of the power of space? Even if it was far from reaching great mastery in the picture of the great sun, Su Qin also had the War God Temple. The War God Temple was a spatial treasure left behind by a supreme expert, and unlike other spatial treasures, the War God Temple could accommodate living beings. If Su Qin was in the War God Temple and then controlled the War God Temple to traverse the void passage, there would be no problem. Next, Su Qin asked Tianjizi a few more questions. Tianjizi naturally answered everything he knew, and even took the initiative to answer some questions that Su Qin didn't ask. Although the Tianjizi sect didn't compete for external objects, it didn't mean that they weren't afraid of death. In front of a celestial like Su Qin, even Tianjizi had to be obedient. You can go back. After Su Qin got the information he wanted, He waved his hand and said, "Go back? Can we go back?" Tianjizi calmed down and was overjoyed. "Thank you for your kindness, Celestial. My Tianjizi sect will always remember your kindness." Tianjizi hurriedly bowed to Su Qin. One must know that Tianjizi secretly spied on Su Qin and tried to use the divination secret technique to see the details of Su Qin's background. This kind of behavior was extremely offensive in a short period of time. It wouldn't be too much even if Su Qin killed them on the spot. After all, no expert would be willing to have their secrets spied on by others. And with Su Qin's permission, Tianjizi and the young Daoist quickly left Chang'an City. Inside the imperial palace, Su Qin walked slowly on the shaded path. According to Tianjizi, there are at least 5 inheritances left behind by the supreme experts in the immortal sect. Su Qin thought slowly in his mind. If the inheritances left behind by the 5 supreme experts were to spread to the overseas martial arts world, it would definitely set off stormy waves. Even many of the major sects would tremble in fear. This was the inheritance left behind by the supreme experts. Even the great sects like witchcraft and Raytheon, which had been passed down for thousands of years and had supreme treasures in their sects, were insignificant and not worth mentioning in the face of the supreme experts' inheritance. But no matter how strong the supreme experts are, there is still a Shoyuan limit. Earth immortals can live for thousands of years, but the supreme experts Shoyuan can only live for 3,000 to 5,000 years at most. Now that 10,000 years have passed since the last vitality tide era, the supreme experts of the first generation should have died of old age. As for whether they were born later, Su Qin shook his head. Perhaps the immortal sect was full of vitality and was close to the peak of the vitality tide, but to break through the void and become a supreme expert, one not only needed vitality, but also needed to comprehend the true great Tao of heaven and earth. This was something that only the human world could satisfy. As for the small world of the immortal sect, in Su Qin's eyes, it was at most vaster than the war god temple and had more vitality. It could satisfy the cultivation needs of earth immortals and even supreme experts, but it was far from enough to cross a major realm. But since the immortal sect is a small world, then some of my plans will have to be changed. Su Qin touched his chin. Originally, Su Qin planned to go to the immortal sect, then sign in at the immortal sect and collect all the Tao accumulations that had accumulated there for thousands of years. But now, it seemed that it would not be possible. Because the immortal sect was not a place, it was a small world. The place Su Qin wanted to sign in was all the places in the immortal sect that might have Tao accumulations. In this way, it would take a lot more time. However, for Su Qin, what he did not lack the most now was time. Once he stepped into the earth immortal realm, Shoyuan would increase by at least 1,000 years. Coupled with the immortal peach, Shoyuan would reach at least 3,000 years. In terms of Shoyuan alone, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the supreme experts. Just as Su Qin was thinking about the immortal sect. Deep in the sea, above a valley shrouded in dark clouds, lightning kept falling as if it would never end. If there was a legend here, they would definitely recognize that this was one of the 9 forbidden areas in the sea, the Thunder Valley. The so-called forbidden area was an area that, due to certain reasons, was formed by the natural evolution of heaven and earth, or man-made, was an area where ordinary creatures would definitely die if they entered. For example, the number 1 forbidden area in the sea, the crack of the abyss, was said to be connected to the underground cave world. Even earth immortals did not dare to approach it. The Thunder Valley was also one of the forbidden areas. The Thunder Valley naturally attracted heavenly lightning, and a large number of heavenly lightning fell at every moment. Ordinary legends would be affected by the heavenly lightning even if they approached it, let alone entering it. Even the disciples of Raytheon were afraid of the Thunder Valley. Although the disciples of Raytheon cultivated the Tao of Thunder, the lightning in the Thunder Valley was too huge. There were even traces of the 9th heaven divine thunder in the depths of the Thunder Valley, which was extremely terrifying. It was said that a certain earth immortal of Raytheon once went deep into the Thunder Valley, but not long after he was seriously injured and came out. He barely recovered after 100 years of recuperation. Since then, this Thunder Dao Earth Immortal had regarded the Thunder Valley as the forbidden area of Raytheon. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he would never allow the disciples of Raytheon to approach it. And at this moment, a figure suddenly rushed out of the Thunder Valley, which was originally roaring with thunder. Behind this figure, there seemed to be thousands of thunder rumbling. Ha ha ha. 300 years, I was trapped for 300 years. After the figure rushed out of the Thunder Valley, he looked up to the sky and laughed, but I still came out. The figure was a man. He was tall, but his clothes were tattered and simple, as if he had experienced hundreds of years. Behind the man, there was a 2-meter-long blade on his back. Vaguely, there were traces of purple thunder flowing around the blade. In addition, just as the man was laughing wildly, the void began to tremble. A vast and endless sea of vitality was attracted. In an instant, the void within a radius of hundreds of miles condensed and was under the man's control. Great Mastery Domain. This man was an Earth Immortal who had mastered the Great Mastery Domain. However, although I was trapped for 300 years, without these 300 years, I really might not be able to enter the Earth Immortal realm so easily. The man took a deep breath, as if he was enjoying something. Even if the man was extremely talented and was known as the most likely existence to enter the Earth Immortal realm in 1,000 years, it was only the most likely. Whether or not he could become an Earth Immortal was still uncertain. Perhaps he would encounter a bottleneck and be trapped for 100 years before reaching the limit of Shoyuan. Has the vitality tide begun to recover? Not long after the man came out, he sensed the vitality that began to boil in the void. He suddenly raised his head and looked in a certain direction. Forget it. It's time to return to Raytheon. I wonder if there is anyone in the world who remembers the name Lei Xuanzi after 300 years? The man's eyes flickered with lightning, as if a thunder god had descended to the world, suppressing the world. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.